I have to squeeze in video time as anywhere I can. So my lighting is a little different because I'm squeezing this in before I go to work. Hey BookTube, it's Kim at Middle of the Book March, and I've got a few tags that I'm planning on doing, but this one I just got tagged in yesterday, I think, and I wanted to get it in October, so I'm shifting my order of tags and doing the most recent first. And I was tagged by Ros of Scallydandling About the Books and Tilly from Tilly's Shelf to do the tag of my 5 favorite Victorian novels. And their tag was inspired by Marissa at Blatantly Bookish, who talked about her 5 favorite Victorian novels, I think in the last 5 years, and they made it into a tag. So I thought I'm going to get this in October. And this is going to be fun for me because it's just so fun to think about, out of all the Victorian novels I've read, which are my favorite. I'm going to move this. There we go. I think that's a little bit better. And I'm going to move this way because my lighting is off. Like I said, my lighting is weird because it's morning. I never film at this time of the day. So let me show you my 5 favorite Victorian novels. And I do have a quick few honorable mentions. Now, the Victorian age took place, as far as I can tell, there's a couple different date ranges, depending on your source, between 1837 and 1901, which I believe was the reign of Queen Victoria in Britain at the time. So that would make sense. That's the Victorian age. And so many wonderful novels came out of that time period. So I'm going to show you my 5 favorites in order of publication date, so the earliest first. None of these are going to come as any surprise to anybody, maybe one, but the rest of them, I'm predictable. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, her only novel. She was a poet, along with Anne and Charlotte. This is her only novel. I just did a read-along of Wuthering Heights and confirmed that this is not a romance. There are many parts of it that are written in the romantic style, but we can't get the romantic style mixed up with a book being a romance. I'm not going to go into great detail on the plots. I think everybody is aware of most of these. And Wuthering Heights is the story of Cathy and Heathcliff. And it's very easy to look at their story as a romantic love story, but it's not. It was a story of manipulation, obsession, very dark, very gothic in atmosphere and tone and setting. But it's one of those classics of the Victorian age that I adore. I just love this book. And I think that's why it's very passionate and temperamental and dark, very unlike a lot of Victorian novels that were published at the same time in history. This was a very fiery publication, and so many things depicted that the publishing world and Victorian sensibilities at the time did not want published. And this was a book that many groups or people of the time tried to subvert or kind of ban. I don't like to use that word. But this was a scandal at its time. One of my favorite books, one of my favorite Victorian novels. The next one is a complete 180, a very different book in tone, and it's Elizabeth Gaskell's Cranford. Just a charming, lovely Victorian novel. And I read this with Ros from Scallydandling About the Books, and the Cranford Women read-along group, was it last? I think it was the beginning of last year. Cranford is just lovely and delightful about a little small town in England named Cranford, and the majority of the population are women. Many of them are single, whether by spinsterhood or widowhood, and it is just a lovely depiction of this little tiny village of women who, get along, don't get along, are gossipy, have really interesting friend group dynamics, but at the end of the day, they really come together for each other, and it is just it's one of those books that has such a wonderful ending. It's not crazy, heavy plot driven, but there is a little plot line in there. It's just a beautiful exploration of female friendship and a little idyllic British female oriented village, and it's just, I loved it. A lovely book. The next one is one of my favorite Charles Dickens novels. Well, probably at this point my favorite. I have not read all of them. I've read 2 of them, and I've got another one ongoing right now. This is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I've loved this since high school, and quite possibly it's one of the shorter ones. Quite possibly it's because it's different. It's so different. This is more of an action-packed, plot-driven, alternate setting novel than Dickens usually writes. This is set in the French Revolution and has one of the most well-known and iconic first lines in a novel of all time. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. And I just love it. Anybody that says that line, it's like I am just transported back to this novel. I can't say enough how much this was one of those books that I originally read it in high school. It was assigned in high school. And, you know, when you're assigned reading in school, it's hit or miss whether you're going to like it or not, or whether you're even going to appreciate it. Because when you read a Victorian novel or a classic novel when you're a child or even a teenager, your level of appreciation is much lower than when you go back in adulthood and read a classic. And this is an example of one that I just loved in high school and continued to adore. I think I've read it one other time in adulthood, and it's due for a reread. I love A Tale of Two Cities. No surprise to anybody, my last 2 of the group of 5 favorite Victorian novels. The book that I renamed my channel for is Middlemarch by George Eliot. I didn't even tell you what the publication dates of these books are. I'm going to go back really quickly. Wuthering Heights was published in 1847. Cranford was published in, oh, where is it? I lost the date. 1853. And A Tale of Two Cities, I think, is 1859. Yeah, 1859. Middlemarch was published, I should know this by heart, and I just looked it up. I wrote the dates down. 1871, one of her later novels. What am I supposed to say about Middlemarch? It's just, I have such an adoration for this book and Eliot as a writer. I did a group read-along of the remaining Eliot novels, excluding Middlemarch and the next book I'm going to talk about, because I had already read them. But Middlemarch is a sprawling, complex, psychologically driven book. Eliot is just a master of depicting the relationships and the motivations behind her characters. She writes such complex dynamics and connections between characters. Middlemarch is the name of yet another English village, a country English village. The background of Middlemarch, kind of the foundational period in time, is the Reform Act, and I actually learned a lot about the Reform Act in English society by watching the series Poldark on PBS. But basically, it's talking about landowners and how much power they had in governmental process. And the Reform Act was supposed to give more voting rights and political power to the regular people, one man, one vote, and of course for men only. But it's a really interesting period in history to learn about before going into Middlemarch, but that's not the primary reason for the novel. This is a connected story of so many different characters. Dorothea Brooke Edward Casaubon, Tertius Lydgate, Rosamund Vincy. There's so many, the Garths. There's so many different characters and families that are connected and linked. There's intrigue, there are family secrets, there is love, there is all kinds of depictions of every level of English society in this novel. It is just wondrous. And this is not a book that I would suggest a beginning reader of classics should pick up. And it's certainly not Eliot's... It's certainly not a book out of Eliot's oeuvre that I would suggest a person start with. Do not start with Middlemarch. If you're ambitious and you really want to take it on, go for it. By all means, pick it up. But I would actually not suggest this one first. I would actually suggest, if you want to read Eliot, to start with Silas Marner. And Eliot's last novel, yes, there's 2 of Eliot's books on my list of my 5 favorite. I could have just made it up of all George Eliot novels. Daniel Deronda, which was published in 1876, was her last novel. And there was a point where I didn't know if I liked Middlemarch or Daniel Deronda more. I shouldn't say liked, I should say adored, because this book made me cry. This is the story of Gwendolen Harleth and the title character, Daniel Deronda. And Eliot tackles what was called at the time the Jewish question. This is a novel about Judaism, Zionism, English society, the connection between Daniel Deronda and Gwendolen Harleth, the comparison and the contrast between the English society, which kind of left out the Jewish population, and then towards the second half of the novel, we get deeper into Daniel Deronda's history, the question of Jewish communities in this Victorian English society, and how they are absorbed, how they are segregated, what that meant for these characters, what the dynamics are between personal relationships. It is yet again another glorious George Eliot novel, and just wonderful. This is probably the last Eliot novel I would recommend to read before you start with Silas Marner or even Mill on the Floss. This is probably the last Eliot novel I would suggest you pick up, because once you've read the rest of her novels, you'll get used to her style. And I would go into this learning a little bit more about Judaism and Zionism to get the best understanding of this book. But it is just glorious. Absolutely loved it. Those are my 5 main favorite Victorian novels. And all of them I need to reread. Actually, Wuthering Heights I've read about 8 times in my life. So I might not reread that one anytime soon. But Middlemarch and Daniel Deronda, certainly I will be rereading those soon. Now I have 3 honorable mentions. This one, as I'm currently rereading, is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This was published in 1844 and 1845 in serial form because it's so large, over 1,200 pages. One of my favorite books of all time. And it's translated from the French. This particular Penguin version is translated by Robin Buss. It's spectacular. So the ultimate revenge story, adventure story, extremely accessible classic novel, even as long as it is. It's just a beauty of a book. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This is a book that I hadn't read until a few years ago. It's one of those classics I never got to. I felt it was kind of problematic with the relationship between Jane Eyre and Mr. Rochester. But I really enjoyed Bronte's writing. I enjoyed Jane Eyre as a character. I didn't put her as high on a pedestal as other readers may. And so many people that I've seen on BookTube, at least, who say this is their favorite novel, loved it. I really did enjoy it. I really appreciated Bronte's writing. This is a very easy classic novel to get into. But yeah, that's why it's not on my list of 5 favorites. And I'm currently reading David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. I'm about a quarter of the way through, and I'm still analyzing. I'm still debating. How do I actually feel about David Copperfield? I'm getting to a point in the novel where I'm finally getting out of the darkness of, you know, child labor and child abandonment and the horrors and the traumas that happen to children in Victorian era London. So I'm getting to a point where it's becoming more positive, more uplifting. So we'll see what happens when I finish that one. So those are some Victorian novels that I wanted to show you and to talk about. Lovely books, all of them. Some of them are so amazing to me and beloved. Thank you, Ros and Tilly, for creating a tag out of Marissa's video. I will link everybody down below. Let me know what you think of any of these classic novels if you've read them. Let me know if any of these are some of your favorites. And if not, write a comment below and tell me which Victorian novels that you love. I'm not going to tag anybody in particular. If you are taking part in Victober and you haven't really talked about how much you love Victorian novels, you are tagged. I would love to see more videos of people talking about their 5 favorites. Write me a comment down below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, everybody. Bye.